Hello, everyone. We're going to look at chapter 11 again, continue on with it. We're looking at some parts of the central nervous system, the diencephalon, the parts of the brainstem, and a little bit about the cerebellum. This is generally slides 33 through 44. So the diencephalon, you've looked at this in lab. This is a very odd way to look at it. These little guys here, if we were able to pull that entire area out, this is what it looked like. Again, in lab, you see it from the sagittal section cutting across, but this is an area between the cerebral hemispheres. It's above the brainstem, as it says. It surrounds the third ventricle. We talked about ventricles in the last section, how they both, I've got these lateral ventricles in each one of the hemispheres, and they drain into that third ventricle. And the third ventricle then drains into, drum roll, the fourth ventricle. But this area is the third ventricle. And I tried to point that out before. It's composed of gray matter, which means that this is where a lot of cell bodies are and where decisions are going to be made. You looked at the two big parts of it in lab, the thalamus and the hypothalamus, which tells you where it's orientated, right? The hypothalamus is below the thalamus. There's going to be, this is an area where it's called the optic chiasm. It's where the optic tracts cross here, as it says here. There's going to be a thing called the infundibular. Infundibular is the name of it. I always like to mispronounce it. I probably shouldn't do that, especially on these little, it's better when we're in person because I can correct it, but infundibular is what connects the hypothalamus here, this little guy right there, the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. All right, I'm not really worried about, we'll talk about the pituitary gland more in when we get into the endocrine system next semester, but I'm not worried about mammillary bodies, and I'm not really worried about the pineal gland. But the pineal gland is in this area. It is associated with melatonin. You'll learn that a little bit more in 211. The big two in here that I want you to know are the thalamus and then the hypothalamus. Now, the thalamus is the gateway, as it says here, for sensory impulses. In the last set of slides, we looked at a thing called the basal nuclei, and we said that the basal nuclei, if this was the cerebral cortex, as motor impulses are leaving the cerebral cortex, they go through this area called the basal nuclei, and all of these, and there would be thousands upon thousands that are going through there, get smoothed out and sent to the muscles through the basal nuclei in a smooth signal, and it uses dopamine to do that. Well, the thalamus is going to be just next to it, and it's taking the incoming information and then sorting it to the different areas that it needs to go to. So it's kind of the counterpart. The basal nuclei is organizing motor information. The thalamus is organizing sensory information. And it's kind of like the front desk, sort of, for the brain. As things come in, these sensory impulses come in, the thalamus organizes and sends it where it needs to go. It does it for all except for this one, this really curious one. The sense of smell bypasses this. Your sense of smell is the most basic of all of your senses, and it again is it's got its own little thing. We'll talk about that at another time. So the thalamus is for sensory. That's a big key for this. It's the sensory. It's organizing sensory impulse, where again the basal nuclei are for motor impulses. Now the hypothalamus is a huge area of homeostasis. Now there are two big areas of homeostasis. This is one of them, and we're going to look at the medulla oblongata in another one. But this is big because it is what links the nervous system to the endocrine system. All right. The hypothalamus is going to control the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland in general controls the endocrine system. That's why it's called the master gland of the body. And so the hypothalamus controls homeostasis by controlling the endocrine system. And through this, it's going to, regulate heart rate, Blood pressure, body temperature. This is one I definitely think is really good to know. This is where your thermostat basically is. In 211, you'll look at water and electrolyte balance. So this is your thirst center. And so it helps you regulate that. This is where you'll find your small intestines release hormones that'll go back to this that will tell you that you're full or whether you're hungry. So it's got a lot of different things. It is a big area of homeostasis, and you should always associate the homeostasis with the fact that it's controlling the endocrine system. And I would definitely know this is where your thermostat, your body temperature regulation is. So the hypothalamus is an area of homeostasis. It works by controlling the endocrine system, and it has a lot of very important visceral activities that it regulates. And then finally, we get to this thing called the limbic system. And now this is a very interesting thing. The limbic system is one of those, like, I hope that now whenever you hear osmosis, you automatically think water. As soon as you hear osmosis, you should think water. The limbic system is all about emotions. The limbic system controls your emotions. Now, I always tell, I'm big on trying to make sure we all know attitudes and emotions we can control. Here's the thing. This limbic system is going to be, and I'm going to use the word tentacles. It says several structures in various parts of the brain. It's basically, it's got tentacles all throughout the brain. And your emotions will alter your opinions and reactions. So again, everybody here has probably done things that, when they're angry that they wish they wouldn't have, that they've, said things that they can't take back, or even when you're in love, when you're very emotionally in love, you're going to do things that you wish you wouldn't have. I think everybody has done that at some point in time. But this is a big thing right now in two aspects. One of them just in our school, knowing that if you start stressing, if you start letting emotions drive you because you're worried, which, look, it's hard to not let happen. You're going to do things that you wouldn't have done rationally. Emotional and rational are two opposite ends of a spectrum, right? So just kind of letting you know. And right now, the world overall tries to get people emotional, because if you're emotional, you no longer are rational. You don't think through your actions, and so you can be pulled in any different direction. So be very careful about making sure you control the limbic system, because if someone can get you emotional, like I said, they can make you do irrational things. It originally, and what it really is trying to do, is help you react to life-threatening things, physiological or psychological, that helps you modify what it is. But again, if there's a lot of people out there that know how to manipulate this. So that's what I want you to remember. The thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the limbic system is part of this diencephalon. So now we look at the brainstem. The brainstem is the connection of the spinal cord, as it says here. So once the spinal cord enters into the cranial cavity, is then called the brainstem. The very first part that coming in here is the medulla oblongata. Then you have this bulge up front called the pons. And then at the very top, which is really in the middle of the brain, if you were able to see the whole brain, and here it is here, this is kind of the middle part of the brain. So it's called the midbrain. So we start with the midbrain. It is it's the area that the uppermost, the most superior. It is between the diencephalon and the pons, which is the most superior. The thing I want you to know is in here, this is called corpora quadrimedia. This is the center for visual and auditory reflexes, which means that it is, like, if you've ever heard on the radio a commercial that has the sound of screeching tires, and you have a reflex to that. It's a scary thing. And I wish no one would do business with businesses that do that, because that's awful. Screeching tires or sounds of ambulances or police should never be on radio commercials, but that's another story. That's what I want you to know about this part of the midbrain. The pons. The pons is really, it says here, a relay between the medulla oblongata and the cerebellum, and the cerebrum. And it's going to also be between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. We'll look at that as we go along. What I want you to know for sure is it helps regulate, and this is not correct actually, it helps regulate the upper limit of breathing. If you take a deep breath in and breathe as much as you can, there'll be a point where you can't breathe in any more air. And there's actually more room, a little bit more room in your lungs, but the pons causes you to shut down your breathing apparatus because it's afraid that you might damage some of the internal structures, those little fragile single layer of flat cells that we call alveoli. So it helps stop your upper limit of breathing. The medulla oblongata you're going to see, and I'm just going to go ahead and jump down. This is the respiratory center. This is controlling normal breathing, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. So it's when you take that deep breath in that the pons says, nope, no more. All right. So the medulla oblongata, I just want to tell you, is a huge area of homeostatic reflexes. Where we talked about the hypothalamus, it's controlling homeostasis by controlling the endocrine system. The medulla oblongata is just an area of reflexes. I've got sensory coming in. It doesn't even have to get into the brain. It gets to the medulla, gets answered, and it goes back out. This is where a lot of the heart rate's going to be controlled, and again, the hypothalamus has it too. Vasomotor, which is basically the size of your blood vessels, vasoconstrict, vasodilate, and then the respiratory, normal breathing. This is a really big area of homeostatic reflexes that are all about the nervous system. Again, where the hypothalamus is reflexes, but it's going to involve the endocrine system. One of the big things here is that injuries to the medulla oblongata, which no brain injury is very desirable, but this is the least desirable. Injuries to the medulla oblongata are, and it shouldn't even say often, it should say they are fatal. It doesn't take much of an injury to this to cause all of your processes to shut down and die. So this is what the brainstem again looks like as that picture was there. I'm not going to have any pictures on the test of it. So there is one other part that's really kind of weird, and you might have heard of this. It's referred to as the reticular formation, or sometimes called the reticular activating system. And what's going on here? And again, please remember that when we're going over these things, this is really complicated stuff. This is stuff that we really, in any one of these, we could take a year to study and just really still be hitting kind of the basics of the grand scheme of things. The reticular formation, what it's doing, it again is going to have it says here, a complex network of nerve fibers scattered throughout the brain stem, blah, blah, blah. What it's doing is, as it says here, filters incoming sensory information. And it's not like the thalamus that's organizing it. What's happening is I have a ton of information coming into my brain. This reticular formation is deciding what is needed to be in the forefront and what isn't. For instance, if you've ever been in an area where there's a group of people, an auditorium, a party or whatever, a bunch of people around you, the people you're talking about, that's what your attention's on. The reticular formation is listening to all the conversation and noises around you and not bringing it to your conscious level. And so I don't know how many people have ever had this happen, but let's say you're in a big crowd and you're hearing things and then all of a sudden you hear your name. It's the reticular formation that is kind of filtering stuff, and because your name's important to you, as soon as the reticular formation hears that, it allows you to pay attention to it. And I hope that makes sense. Another way to think of it is I like hiking, I like camping. So if I'm walking in the woods, as I'm stepping, I no longer really hear the leaves crunch under my feet because it's not something that I need to really pay attention to. But you let leaves rustle and move that aren't according to my steps, that's going to take my attention to it. All right, so that's what the reticular formation is. Now, one of the things with this, it allows you to sleep while you've got things in the background. It allows you to it says decreased activity causes you to sleep, and that's a bad way of saying it because it's still going on. For instance, if any of y'all have had kids, you have a very light sleep pattern when you first become a parent because you are listening for your kids to cry. And so it's the reticular formation it's kind of what we would call spidey senses. It's kind of listening without trying to wake you up. Now, here's the one thing that I want you to know, kind of like we were talking about the sense of smell not being in that corpus quadrimedia, the sense of smell really isn't regulated by the reticular formation. And so that is why it's so important to have smoke detectors, because the smell of smoke won't wake you up. And most of the time, people who die in fires die from smoke inhalation, and it's usually because they didn't wake up in time. That's why they have smoke detectors now. So that's why it's important, and it ties back to the reticular formation. Now, this is something, again, that goes back to some of the things that I just think the book, this is a real complicated subject, and I think the book does a bad job of really making it clear. They just categorize it into REM and non-REM sleep. We're not going to get too much into it, but what I want you to know, non-REM sleep is dreamless. This right here is one that I'm going to tell you I do not agree with. Non-REM sleep is not restful. For anyone who slept an 8-hour night or 6 to 8 hours during the night and wake up and still feel tired, what happened is you stayed in non-REM sleep. This is, again, like I say, dreamless. This is just where you are. It's not terrible, but it's not getting into that deep sleep that we call REM sleep. REM sleep is where dreams occur, and this is where the majority of the rest comes from. All right. So non-REM sleep, and again, there's three. I'm not going to ask you, but there's three ranges from light to heavy. The closer we get to the heavy, the closer we get to the REM sleep, and the closer we get to heavy, the more restful it is. Right? If I'm just sleeping really light, then it's going to definitely be terrible rest sleep. You'll wake up very groggy and sleepy. Heavy, I'll feel a little bit better, but it's not going to be great. So what I want you to know, non-REM sleep is dreamless. In general, it is not very restful. In REM sleep, this is where dreams occur, and this is where we get the majority of our rest. Hope that makes sense. Now, this one is a very strange and interesting thing. The cerebellum. Cerebellum literally means little brain. It is this little part that's at the very posterior, inferior part of the brain, and it has its own little stuff to it. It has two hemispheres. I would want you to know that. I'm not worried about the falx cerebri, cerebelli. You do need to know the vermis is the part that connects the two hemispheres. I'm not saying that that's huge, but I would know that. And definitely this. I don't know how many people would know what this means, this word, arbor vitale, vital. This word literally means, arbor means tree, vital means life. It is the tree, it's described as the tree of life. This is the white matter that's inside. And if you look here, and I wish I could have enlarged it, if you look here, you can see this white matter looks like a tree. And so back in the ancient days when they were putting all this down, they thought that they called it the tree of life. Now, it does have an outer layer of gray matter, so it's the cerebellar cortex. Again, cortex means outer layer. Now we just know it's in the cerebellum, and it is gray matter. Now, some of the other things here, what I want to talk to you about, these ones right here, these three, integrate sensory information concerning positions of body parts, coordinates skeletal muscle activity, which is motor information, and it helps maintain posture. All right, so what happens is, as sensory information comes in, it's going to be routed through here, come back out, go up to the brain, get determined on what's happening, and then when my brain sends a motor impulse, it's going to go out, it's going to go through here, and then come back out. And so they're coordinating. Now, this is how I want you to look at it. And again, I know that nobody in here has ever had an alcoholic beverage, so I'm talking about somebody else. But if you've ever seen someone that's had too many to drink, and like imagine you're looking at a person at the bar, and in front of them is a pint glass of beer, and they've already drank way too many of them, and they're trying to grab it, and you can literally watch how their hand doesn't know where the glass is, and they're kind of grappling for it, right? I think everybody's kind of seen someone like that, or can't walk, they stumble a lot. What the cerebellum does is, let's say I'm going to grab my beer glass. The senses that I am projecting that are coming in are telling me where that glass is. As my motor impulses are going out so I can grab the glass, the sensory incoming information is checking the outgoing motor information to make sure it lines up. So in alcohol, it decreases the cerebellar function. So the person can't trust the incoming sensory, and so they don't coordinate. Another way to look at it is walking. If someone has been drinking, when they're walking, they're not very sure step because their brain isn't matching up sensory and motor, and it's all because of the cerebellum. And so it's a very important thing, and this is how it maintains posture, because it's monitoring all of my senses coming in, and it keeps me upright as best it can. All right, so again, it is, and this last one kind of tells you how it's integrating a bunch of different things. This is also where the limbic system, auditory areas, all of this is going on. That's why that makes this such a complicated organ to really study, because nothing is really all by itself. Everything works together. But that's what I'd want you to know about the cerebellum. These parts right here, for sure, as far as the activity, it's taking the sensory, the incoming information, and matching it up with the outgoing motor information. And this will allow me to help with my posture as well as just normal moving. I want you to know that it has two hemispheres. It's got a gray matter called the cerebellar cortex because it's on the outside. The white matter on the inside looks like a tree, so it was called the tree of life, which is arbor vitale, or vital. I always want to put that L in there. And that the hemispheres are connected by the vermis, all right, which would be the equivalent of the corpus callosum in the cerebrum. So this is a breakdown of the different parts to it. I try to enlarge some of it so you can kind of see it a little better. And it gives a little idea of what's going on. Again, anything on the test on this, I'm going to be very generic and very light on these. But they are important to know, especially when you're going into the healthcare field. All right.